So, Origin. This is a really interesting film because it is adapting a book which came out in 2020 called Caste, The Origins of Our Discontents by Isabel Wilkerson, excuse me. And when that book came out in 2020, as I said, critically acclaimed, very, very lauded book. A lot of people talked about it and read it. I even specifically remember hearing a lot about that book just because of how much conversation it was generating. And it's no accident that, at the time during COVID, we were dealing with a lot of political unrest, a lot of social injustice, a lot of things were happening in the country at that particular time. And so it was a groundswell of commentary about this book. And so now Ava DuVernay is tackling what I would say is a really challenging book and challenging material, bringing it to live action. And this movie is actually technically a 2023 movie, even though it's had its wide release in January. And as I said earlier, it did not get nominated for Academy Awards, but it is receiving a lot of critical acclaim and a lot of conversation and attention from various filmmakers and also people in the acting community as well. It made sort of a late run to kind of be nominated. I know Angelina Jolie was hosting screenings for the movie. They're trying to really do a grassroots campaign. I think Ava DuVernay is kind of dissatisfied with the marketing of the film and how it's been marketed and the job that Neon has done or not done, maybe in this instance with this movie. And so all of that out the way, all that contextual information out the way, we got a chance to go check this movie out a few days ago. And so what did you think about this new film from Ava DuVernay?
So maybe a couple months after the book by Isabel Wilkerson, Caste, The Origins of Our Discontents, it's going crazy. A lot of, like you said, a lot of people are talking about it. I decide to read it. I only read, unfortunately, I do this thing. I'm really bad at completing books. I'll read half of the book, like a whole half of the book. And then I have like 6 half books read right now. So ridiculous. But Caste is absolutely one of them. But what I will say is I definitely read enough to, one, understand the message that Isabel Wilkerson was trying to say in the book, but also see what it would be like for it to translate on screen, this thing that Ava DuVernay is doing. I first have to say, this is very hard material to adapt. Like, shout out to Ava DuVernay for even attempting to make a film like this. It's kind of crazy, like, when you put it in context of what the book actually is. And what's so interesting also, in fact, is this movie is it's a nonfiction retelling, but it's fictional at the same time. It's so weird. It's almost like if Isabel Wilkerson, the process of her making the book is kind of what this movie is, and everything that went into at least fictional Isabel Wilkerson's life, and how this book was made, and her thought process, and the people that was in her life at the time, and how that goes back to talk about the contents of the book. It's really kind of meta and self-explanatory in that way. It's really interesting concept to try to put to the big screen. But I think overall, man, I absolutely enjoyed and understood what was happening here. And one thing I'll say is, throughout all of Ava's, I think, her career, I've always liked her as a filmmaker, but this film to me had like the most style in it from Ava. I was like, dang, this is a little different, Ava. I wasn't expecting you to I think, shoot it like that. I wasn't expecting, I think, the grit that she gave us in this movie. She does something that's also really difficult in this film, I think, and it's a retelling or reimagining of the story of Trayvon Martin. And I think that's just like a hard thing to pull off in general. One, it's a hard thing to film emotionally, but to make it make sense so far down the line. Like, technically this, that happens 10 years ago and she's bringing it to form in a film here. I think it's bold because a lot of people might find that old or tasteless or any of those other things, but I think it works again in the context of what the book and what the movie is trying to say. So I was pleasantly surprised on the way Ava decided to view things and to point things, I think, in this film. Other thing I'll say is the performances. Oh wow, yes. Aunjanue Ellis, I mean, she is doing so much tremendous work here. It is her and John Bernthal specifically, who plays the love interest of the fictional Isabel Wilkerson or Aunjanue Ellis here. They're both doing such tremendous work. And to be honest, I think something that does take away from the film for me a little bit is just how crazy sad it is. And I know that sounds crazy and that might be reality, but half the movie felt like we're just supposed to be sad the whole time. And The book doesn't necessarily feel like that. It does feel more informative. It does feel more, this is my proposition of what racism comes from, is the idea of caste. But the movie was just so sad. It was just like, I don't know if we're still informing or if the drama has taken over. So that took away from the movie just a little bit for me. But R and R, by and large, I enjoyed it. Very hard message to get across. I think she did potentially her best. It kind of feels like, you know how we kind of argue how Dune is a hard book to adapt? I will say the same thing about Caste. Like, it's like a very hard book to adapt. But I think they did what they could. And I like the creativeness behind the way it was made. So again, by and large, I enjoyed it, and I think they did something. And I think, well, this is another movie that we'll be talking about for a little bit.
So Origin is a really challenging movie to talk about. Like you said, because the book in and of itself is extremely challenging and complex and presents some very layered ideas. But Origin is a challenging movie to talk about because on one hand, I really admire the ambitious nature of this work and what Ava's trying to accomplish here. I respect the hell out of it. I think that the swings that she's taking from a cinematic perspective are so admirable. And the fact that she made the choice to adapt a book that many consider to be unadaptable is a really, really tremendous thing to do. And she's the one that's cut out for it. She's never shied away from challenges. She's always confronted really difficult subject matter and drawing those connections and making the hard conversations very apparent for the masses. You know, you look at her movies like Selma or the documentary 13th or When They See Us, like these things
Mm-hmm.
are incredibly difficult things to confront and to deal with. And often they are historical real life occurrences. And we have to really talk about them and understand them and unpack them and really get to the true nature of what they mean and the repercussions for society. And so I love her for that. And I love her as a filmmaker for always tackling those things. And what she's managed to do here is to take this really rich, layered, and complex text that I think raises, you know, tons and tons of questions. And it really asks you as a viewer or as a reader to kind of decontextualize and unlearn to a certain extent hundreds of years of American history and global
Mm-hmm.
oppression and racism and these systemic things that have plagued humanity for so long. And it's asking you to rethink how you actually look and view those things. And I think that in the movie, when it comes to translating Caste into cinematic form and to unpack and break those ideas, Ava has managed to really create this sprawling, epic movie that synthesizes multiple elements, I think, from both dramatic storytelling but also documentary storytelling. Because to your point, it doesn't always stick to non-fictional things. It does create a fictional story underneath all
Mm-hmm.
of the more accurate textual things that it's trying to translate. And so this feels like something that's almost new. It's really experimental in that way, but it's also really risky because what you do is you create a scenario where maybe you connect with one aspect of the film, but you don't connect with the other aspect of it. And I think that that's where I fell with this experience in Origin, because for most of the time that I was watching it, it had me questioning one thing: is this really a movie?
Mm.
And do these semi fictionalized elements actually make up what could be a good movie? And I think the answer is somewhere in between. It's both yes and no for me.
Mm-hmm.
I think that, when you look at the film, the structure of it's divided up into segments. You'll kind of go back and forth between the fictional elements that's really examining Wilkerson's life and what she's going through, the personal tragedies that she's dealing with, while she's trying to bring this concept to life, while she's trying to get it greenlit and approved. She's trying to get people to buy into it. She's interviewing people. She's balancing those two things. And when we were focusing on the segments and the elements that specifically serve the book, I think that the movie's extremely successful. I think when
Mm-hmm.
it tackles those things specifically as relates to racism and caste and what that means for American society and global society, and just the differences and the similarities between the slave trade and the Jews in the Holocaust and the Dalits in
Yep.
India, that stuff
Mm-hmm.
really, really worked for me. But the segments of the movie that are supposed to serve the fictional pieces and the human drama, the life of Isabel Wilkerson, that stuff didn't really work for me. And I think that that's where it starts to fail, because from an emotional perspective, I think this movie's kind of inert. You don't for me personally, I didn't always feel emotionally connected to the characters, because I think that back
Mm-hmm.
and forth was just so apparent and so prevalent throughout the movie. It made it very difficult to connect with certain characters. It made it difficult to connect with the John Bernthal character and the emotional roller coaster that he's going through. Or there's another moment in the movie where Isabel Wilkerson, she needs her basement. She needs to get that fixed because it's flooded. And you have a character that
Mhm.
walks in, played by Nick Offerman. He clearly is a very, very far right wing type of person. I won't give away the specific element, but she makes it very clear like what type of person he is and his political ideology. And that moment of the movie didn't really work for me. You know, I think that those human drama
Mm.
components, those kind of lose me in the essence of this film. But when it's focusing on more so translating, I think what the book is about and what caste means and how to really think about these ideas in a larger global contextualization, you know, sort of piece of human history. I think that that stuff works, and I do appreciate the experimentation, you know, playing with form of storytelling, playing with the book and doing something different, not just trying to, I guess, make a documentary out of it, trying to do something that's a little bit closer to a narrative feature film. I appreciate that, and I think that there's a lot of value to this movie as a cinematic translation of a celebrated text. I think that there's a ton of value there, and I would still encourage people to see it because I think it's worth seeing, and I think it'll open your eyes and make you think about things differently and really get you to learn about, you know, this point of view specifically. But unfortunately for me, the sum of its parts kind of wind up just being fine. There were a few emotional segments that are more closely related to the human drama that were okay. They were fine. They started to get to that place, but similar to what we saw with the Book of Clarence, they kind of came too little too late for me towards the end of the film. I was like, damn, where was that at the beginning of the movie? Where was that when I
Mhm.
really needed it to latch onto it? And unfortunately, we got it too late. But this is a dense and sprawling movie that has a lot that it wants to say. I do want to ask a follow up though. As
Yeah.
we said, zero Academy Award nominations, pretty much no acknowledgement from any awards bodies or anything of that nature. Now, you know, there's other movies that kind of fall in that category, like the Iron Claw, for example. You know, that's
Yeah.
a critics movie. You know, that's not necessarily a movie that academies are going to love, but critics are going to celebrate it and acknowledge it at their shows. Origin might fall in that same category as
Mhm.
well, but what do you think about that? And what do you think about the fact that, like, you know, again, Ava DuVernay has been pretty public about her disappointments, I think, with just, you know, how this film has been marketed and the lack of enthusiasm around it. And the fact that, like, I remember she shared a story about Anjanae Ellis Taylor, like, standing outside of a movie theater handing out, like, flyers to, like, an upcoming screening, just doing this promotion on her own, you know? So what do you think
Mhm.
about just maybe potentially the failures on the part of the distributor, Neon, who's, like, the main distributor, like, just their, I don't want to say that they buried this movie, but perhaps it should have came out earlier. Perhaps it should have came out in
Yeah.
October or November instead of a weird January release, and it only had like 1 week limited release in New York and
Mhm.
LA. It didn't play in many theaters. How do you feel about just the whole situation and, you know, sort of where it's landed in the conversation at this particular point?
I really do think that that release part of it is a little questionable. I think on their point of view, because when it does come to award shows, to be honest, when it comes to Origin, I'm questioning how many people have actually seen the movie. And I think that's like, and that's a whole thing for me. I'm like, I don't, I know maybe 3 people that have seen Origin, and you one of them. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's you are one of them, and so it's like that. There is something I think around Origin that doesn't feel like other Ava DuVernay movies. You know what I'm saying? When they see his had Netflix pushing the hell out of the 13th had Netflix pushing the heck out of that movie. What was the other movie she did with
Selma.
Disney?
Oh no.
Selma too. Oh, A Wrinkle in
Wrinkle
Time.
in Time, yeah.
Disney, of course, they're gonna push the hell out of that movie. Selma, also, you know what I'm saying? And so it's just this is the one Ava DuVernay release that feels like it has gone under a lot of people's radars, and I think there's several reasons for that though. I think this movie's hard to market and understand and get people to understand what they're about to watch, unless you really do know what Caste is about, like the book Caste is about. In my mind, there's no way you're going to know what the movie's about. You don't understand what the book is about. And so I think that's a hard thing to market. I think the data's wrong. I think they could have been better in marketing it. You know what I mean? Maybe there's a better trailer they could have made. I don't really know. I just know the material is so difficult that I can understand why it's so difficult for everything around it. And so I'm very curious to see what they could have done better, but I'm sure there's a multitude of things.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, nobody is saying it. That's really, I think, the biggest thing that's working against it. But to your point, man, it's a really difficult movie to describe and explain to people. I remember
It
seeing the
is.
trailer a couple of months ago, and I didn't know at that time that it was based on the book. I just had no idea. And so when I saw the
Mm-hmm.
trailer, I was like, well, what is this about? Like, is this a love story? Is she searching for her origins and her ancestry? Like, I had no clue what it was
Yeah.
ultimately about. And John Bernthal is in it. It's like, yo, John Bernthal is like getting down with a black woman. Like, what's going on here? I didn't understand it. But of course, you go see the film, you realize, like, it's unpacking some very, very important topics and themes. But how do you sit down and say, like, this is how we tell the story of this movie through a trailer or through marketing?
Yeah.
That's a really difficult proposition. And unless you're following Ava as a filmmaker, or Anjanae Ellis Taylor as an actor, unless you're like really wanting to keep up with them in the work, I think you would probably look at this and say, like, I don't even get what this story is, and so I'm not going to go take the time to see it. And I think probably Neon had a similar challenge, and they just found it maybe a little too difficult to put too much behind it, and just they decided on a different strategy with the release. I guess, to say it nicely. But hopefully, I think Origin, to your point, because it is based on such an important text, it will outlive this conversation of these few months of award season. Hopefully the film is resonant enough for enough people that it will have conversations and be talked about for years and years to come. But we will have to see. But folks, those are all of our thoughts on the brand new Ava DuVernay film Origin. If you check this out, definitely hit us up.